Hello and welcome to this Info Security Magazine webinar. It's Michael Hill here, I'm the editor of the magazine, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar for the next 60 minutes, where we'll be exploring the evolution of ransomware as a service and malware delivery mechanisms. And a big thank you goes out to Act0 for their sponsorship of this session. Okay, so just before I introduce our speakers and run over the content for today's session, I'm going to run through some of the key housekeeping points on my end. So there are going to be 3 poll questions for you in the webinar today. So I'll read those out for you. They're multiple choice, no wrong or right answers, but we're just keen to get your thoughts. So please do vote on those, and we will be spending some time reflecting on the findings of those questions before we finish up. You can also submit a question that you might have for any of our speakers regarding the topic or any of the points that are made. And you can note on there if your question is for a particular speaker, and we'll do our very best to answer all of your questions before we finish up. For those of you on social media, our hashtag is InfoSecWebinar, so do feel free to join the discussion on social media as well. And just a quick note about CPE credits. This webinar does qualify you to 1 CPE credit based on an attendance time of 50 minutes. That's 50 minutes. Once you've attended for that length of time, you'll be able to access a certificate which you can submit for your credit. Please note it normally takes 48 hours for those certificates to be made ready for you to download. Okay, so to introduce our panel joining us for this webinar, delighted to have Sean Hittle, who is Distinguished Security Engineer at Act0. We also have Brian Honan, who is CEO of BH Consulting. And finally, Steve Piper, who is founder and CEO of CyberEdge Group. So a fantastic panel joining us today for this debate. So just before I open the first poll question, I'll just run through the general outline for this session. So we're going to have a presentation from Sean that's going to very much set the scene of the topic with some key points, and that's then going to be followed by an insightful panel discussion with all 3 speakers. So very excited to get on with both of those. So just before I do, I will open the poll question, which is on your screen now. So firstly, we want to know, how confident are you in your organization's ability to successfully prevent, detect, and mitigate ransomware? Is that A, very, B, reasonably, C, very unconfident, B, reasonably unconfident, or E, unsure? That one's going to be live now, so please do vote on that. And again, we'll come back to those results a bit later, but very keen to get your thoughts and opinions on that one. And now, handing over to Sean for our presentation. So Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's a little weird when we're doing these things from home, but please ask questions, as Michael pointed out. I look forward to the chat afterwards with our panelists here. So today we're going to talk through a little bit about the ransomware as a service, how it impacts everybody today, as well as some of the malware delivery mechanisms that we're seeing using ransomware as a service. So what I'm going to do is I'm just kind of going to go through and set the stage a little bit as to what ransomware as a service is, how a couple of the main components, extortion as a service and in-home local propagation, are being used by ransomware as a service, and then hand it over to the roundtable discussion that Michael talked about earlier. So I'm the Distinguished Security Engineer at Act0. My background is in creating new concept threat protection designs. I've worked for big companies like Symantec. I've worked for federal government doing the same type of thing. A lot of my career has been spent with deep dive threat analysis and all kinds of threat of the day, which of course for the last almost decade has been a very large component of that has been ransomware. So I've had the luxury of reverse engineering almost every ransomware family that's came along and looked at its underlying infrastructure and what did they do wrong, what did they do wrong intentionally, and the rest of the badness that occurs throughout there. So ransomware as a service, it gets called RaaS, R-A-A-S, because nowadays everything has to have AAS, of course. What is ransomware as a service? So ransomware as a service is something that really became a problem of its own in about 2015. We'll get into a deeper timeline as we progress here, but it really grew out of the malware as a service sect as a whole, when everybody realized that they could use cryptocurrency for payment. Even in the early 2000s, there were things like people could buy server-side polymorphism for their attacks, meaning that each iteration of the attack would be slightly different and enough to get through most endpoint antivirus, or as we call it now, next generation antivirus. Ransomware-as-a-Service offers the ability for those that want to be able to focus on the hard technical aspects, like making sure that their crypto systems are entirely sound and all of the infrastructure that's required throughout there, including multilingual support and everything that would be required to collect the ransom, to be entirely separate from those that don't necessarily have any technical background at all. They want to be able to just infect different places, cause havoc without any real understanding of how a business would be run from the perspective of the support channels needed, or what is going on under the hood technically in terms of how the exploits work that are packaged with RaaS services, how the crypto systems work, or any of the key exchange problems that have to happen there. So we see a couple of different main models that occur here that we'll talk through. In some cases, the ransomware-as-a-service vendors are asking for just a flat fee, and we'll talk through that a little bit. But in other cases, they're wanting a cut of the bounty from each ransom, or in a bunch of cases, they're not even allowing people to purchase the really, what do you want to call them, the really sophisticated elements of their ransomware-as-a-service without proving that they are bringing in bounty, they're bringing in ransoms. So it's a very established model at this point, a very robust, well understood model that has a lot of the bugs worked out at this point. So we have a white paper that's available in the attachments link. It covers a lot of the history of ransomware-as-a-service, the timeline, how the ransomware, the as-a-service component helps the spread. Covers a lot of the post-disruption changes that happen. Please download the white paper from the attachments link and ask any questions as we go along here, or feel free to hit us up directly afterwards. So a quick timeline to give a little bit of background about ransomware-as-a-service. It really started with talks in 2015. You can see a little bit of a snap of the original underground sale of talks there from 2015. That was about fall, if memory serves me right. And they were really throwing it out there as just a mechanism to separate themselves from the distribution that's needed, the infection stage, the infection using the ransom. But it kind of sat on the back burner for a little while, and then a couple months later, all of the competitors, all the different gangs that are using ransomware just ransomware at the time, realized that the as-a-service model was where the money was to be had for the authors of these systems. So we saw a whole bunch of new, pure, right from the ground up, ransomware-as-a-service gangs, groups, nation-state actors take off from there, as well as a bunch of existing ransomware service port themselves to use the as-a-service model. And you can see some of this in the white screen grab from on the right-hand side there, where because of all the competitive nature here, this caused a real race to the bottom in terms of pricing. So at the time, this was 2016, ransomware-as-a-service could buy the full license, use it for however you want with all features enabled for a very small amount of money. And they weren't really looking for anything at all after that. I mean, we've since seen a pretty major deviation from this, where the really good, well-constructed ransomware-as-a-service systems aren't even giving the core functionality out unless clients, purchasers prove that they have access to X files in terms of quantity, or a certain quantity of people that they can readily infect. So the next lineage, I'm going to focus on the Satan lineage. It's one of the more dominant ransomware-as-a-service systems, but I'm only singling it out because it has a couple of key components here that help us talk through a bunch of the infrastructure things that we're seeing from the attack side. So 2017 was about the first time that we started seeing the Satan RaaS. And then for whatever reason, it rebranded itself to DBGER. I don't really understand why. And then 2019, we started seeing the introduction of the key components, technical components here, that have really paved the way for some of the broader uses of ransomware that we've all heard of in the last year or so. So the first thing that Satan added in 2019 was propagation over server vols. So it started including right from the get-go things like exploits for Apache vulnerabilities and different server vols. I mean, they've since broadened the spectrum of exploits that they're including right away with ransomware. And a bunch of us are aware of the 0 day for Microsoft Exchange that came out yesterday. So I mean, it's always in the back of my mind that 0 day like that gets bundled into one of these ready ransomware services. And then we also saw things like Mimikatz bundled into Satan as well. So evolution of ransomware as a service into extortion as a service. So this starts off as any conventional ransomware attack. The attacker goes and buys a copy of ransomware, infects one endpoint. Now, if you go back to, let's say 2018 or somewhere around there, that's where the ransomware attack would begin. It would just encrypt all the files on that endpoint, they'd be done. But unfortunately, the attackers don't operate this way anymore. They spend a long time in the victim's environment. They'll be in there for weeks, months, somewhere in that area, and they'll be looking for all the crown jewels, and they'll begin leaking this data. And I mean, some of the ransomware as a service providers don't even give the key components unless the purchasers can prove that they have gigabytes of data. In some cases, these exfiltrations will be half a terabyte compressed. They can be very large. And after the attacker realizes that they have the whole kit and caboodle stolen from the victim organization, then they go to the traditional ransomware attack where they start encrypting all the files. And of course, at this point, everybody that's compromised is going to see a pop-up on their screen asking for a ransom. Everyone in the company is going to be scrambling around trying to figure out what to do with that. But whether you pay or not, a couple weeks, couple months down the road, often at an inopportune time, right in front of a shareholder meeting, is that, hey, victim company, we're going to leak all of your information, all your source code, all of your embarrassing photos, whatever we happen to steal from you, unless you're paying us five Bitcoin a month or something like that. So extortion as a service, something that is one of the more dominant things that we've seen ransomware used for in the last year. And the next one is something that thankfully we haven't seen in a huge way yet, but we have seen some indications of attacks going this way. And this is something that it's one of those things that over the years of incident response, you kind of get a spidey sense for, hey, this is bad and it's getting worse and the hairs stand up on the back of the neck. And this is one of those. So this is where we saw Satan start to bundle itself with things like Mimikatz to steal credentials. You start to see Satan also including different exploits in its native framework so that it can propagate. Well, of course, a year ago, we all started working from home. I mean, aside from firefighters and other emergency care workers, we're all sitting at home. But we're also all connecting to a corporate environment through a VPN or other means that allow us to, in the case of the diagram here, the left computers are all everybody from one corporation connecting through a VPN, sharing information. And of course, eventually one of these machines is going to get compromised. And within that corporate environment. Now, when everybody was working in an office, what would happen at that point is it would just be a ransomware attack contained entirely to that corporation for the most part. It might propagate to a couple supply chain vendors or something like that, but for the most part, it was entirely contained. But what we're seeing more recently with the inclusion of different exploits and propagation mechanisms like over email or file shares and things like that is local propagation, physically local propagation. So now what we see is, in addition to the encryption of the files within the first victim organization, perhaps they also, the attacker also drops a bunch of crypto miners and things like that, but they propagate locally. So this is where they're going to do what they can to get onto local file shares, movie shares, gaming machines. Perhaps your spouse is at home working for a completely different organization, and they're just sitting there working away, and all of a sudden, boom, they're also infected by the exact same ransomware attack. So now, in addition to the farther propagation and likely additional bounty that the attacker will be asking for, there's a couple extra liability streams here. I mean, at what point is the motivation to deal with the attacker going to be influenced by personal destruction of data, rival corporations in the case of a spouse's company or spouse's work potentially, also being compromised in this. So it becomes an extra liability stream there. Let's hand it over to the discussion, Michael.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sean. Thoroughly enjoyed that. A really great introduction to the topic, and yeah, some great points made there that we'll no doubt touch upon in a bit more detail in the next few minutes. So yes, I'm going to close the voting on the first poll question now. Some really great results on that one. We'll have a look at those a bit later, but a big thank you to everyone that voted on that. And as you can see on your screen, you've got poll question number 2, which is, does your organization have a working ransomware recovery plan? And your options are yes, and it is proven to be effective. B, yes, but its effectiveness is unproven. C, no, but we are planning one. D, no, or E, unsure. So that's now live on your screen. So please do vote on that one. Very keen to get your thoughts on that one as and when we can. But now I'm going to drop down our poll, our slides, and bring back our speakers. So hello everyone. So now's the time to unmute and get ready for the discussion. So I think what I'll do, obviously we had a great opening there from Sean, so thanks so much for that. I'm going to ask Brian and Steve to quickly introduce yourselves and just tell our viewers a bit of your background and the work that you do. So Brian, should we start with you?
Sure, thanks Michael. So my name is Brian Honan. I'm CEO of BH Consulting. We're an independent cybersecurity advisory firm based in Dublin, Ireland. I myself have well over 20, maybe nearly 30 years experience now in the field, and have seen ransomware evolve from when it started back in the 90s, and you paid your ransom by Western Union or other wire transfer means, all the way now to where cryptocurrencies have really made ransomware such a big threat. But so we've worked with various different clients of all sizes and internationally. I've also set up and head Ireland's first computer emergency response team, which is IRISCERT, and through that, obviously, we see a lot of the impact of ransomware going on as well. And for 4 years, I acted as a special advisor to Europol's European Cybercrime Centre, EC3, which actually now has a very good resource for anybody out there called nomoreransom.org, which is a website dedicated by Europol and supported by many security vendors and by our own company as well, BH Consulting, in distributing decryption keys, non-decryption keys for ransomware, and giving it good advice on how to prevent becoming victim of a ransomware attack. So looking forward to having a good, lively discussion this afternoon.
Fantastic. Great to have you, Brian. And Steve, a few words from you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Steve Piper, founder and CEO of CyberEdge Group. CyberEdge is the largest research and marketing firm to serve cybersecurity vendors. We're very well known for our annual cyber threat defense report. So I might quote a few statistics. We're going to be launching our 8th annual CDR on April 21st, and I can give you a few sneak peek statistics related to ransomware. But on a personal note, I'm a proud CISSP and thrilled I get a CPE credit from this. Woohoo!
I think it's only if you watch those, Steve. Oh, sorry to break it to you. It's not definitely no, but you should check it. But yeah, we'll look into that. Okay, no, but again, yeah, thanks for being here with us, Steve. Great to have you. And let's come back to you on that then, Steve. So obviously we've had a great opening there from Sean, looking at some of the key trends that that we've been seeing over the last 12 months. But what's your take on the key ransomware trends that we've been seeing and impacting organizations?
So I'm one of those guys that's an eternal optimist. Look at a glass that's 50% water in it. The glass is half full. I wish I had some optimism to share about ransomware. I feel like we're in this vicious cycle, and it's not getting any better anytime soon. So very briefly, our annual cyber threat defense report, I'll call it CDR, we survey 1,200 security professionals from 17 industries and 17 countries and 19 industries. So it's a very diverse report, and we're very thankful, by the way, for the coverage from your media publication last year. So we ask, has your organization, and I should say, this is organizations with 500 plus employees, so not small businesses, so 500 plus up to 25,000 plus employees. But across the board, we ask, were you successfully compromised by ransomware last year? And then we ask, did you pay the ransom? And then we ask, if you paid the ransom, did you get your data back? So 4 years ago, when we first posed the question, did you get your data back? 49%, just under half of the ransom payers got their data back. And that, when we announced that in a press release, it got just major coverage in Wall Street Journal, Fortune magazine, and all the security publications. So to give you a sneak peek of our April 21st announcement, that number has jumped from 49% to almost 72%. Okay, so now almost 3/4 of ransom payers are getting their data back. The problem here is that's good news, I guess, for the ransom payers, but it's enticing more organizations to pay ransoms. And 4 years ago, about 39% of organizations paid ransoms. These days, it's around 57%. Okay, and then of course, the more ransom payers there are, that's funding this multi-billion-dollar ransomware industry and making it more beneficial, more financially viable to, commit these ransomware attacks. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, and I wish I saw some sort of end in sight, but I don't, and it's bumming me out as an optimist.
Yeah, great points. Thanks, Steve. I'm going to come to you now, Brian, and
yeah,
keen to get your take, just briefly, on what you've seen in terms of trends in ransomware, but also at the same time moving on to our next point here. Outlining one of the key challenges that organisations are facing right now with defending and detecting ransomware.
Sure. Well, I'm like Steve. I'm an optimist, but I'm also a techie. So rather than seeing a glass being half full or half empty, I'd say the glass is the wrong size. So, and I think that's where we are at the moment. Steve is very correct and very right to point out the biggest problem we have with the ransomware threat, to be quite frank, is not really a technical issue, is that criminals by their nature will use the easiest way for them to make money. And if we continue to pay them money, they're going to continue using the same techniques and hone those techniques and use the money they get from victims to make their attacks more effective and more efficient. Like even just last week, we saw the announcement that the RaaS ransomware strain has been discovered to have a wormable component in it, which is quite worrying. That WannaCry caused huge amounts of damage 2-3 years ago, we all remember, and luckily we haven't had as bad an attack, or nearly as bad as attacks since then. But if RaaS or other ransomware strains become vulnerable, well, then we're going to be in a whole new world of pain. But I think there's a lot of stuff we can do, and this is where my optimistic side comes out. And I will also maybe call out a lot of the security vendors that we have and software that we rely on to defend our systems. Ransomware, at its core, in my opinion, is basically another form of a computer virus. And here we are in 2021, 2-3 decades of antivirus vendors being out there, and we're still getting hit by viruses and ransomware. So obviously there's something fundamentally wrong that we keep repeating and doing over and over again. So we need to change this. So fundamentally, I don't think this problem is going to be solved by technology alone. We're going to need to make sure that businesses understand the risk posed and put in correct measures. If you've got a reliable, up-to-date, decent backup, you're not going to need to pay the attackers to recover your data from. And the better robust backups we have, the less people need to pay ransom, and that will drive it down. We're also seeing that many governments. The US has started already, where they have issued sanctions against individuals alleged to be behind ransomware, part of these cyber gangs, and also in countries where these individuals are typically located. So you, as a potential victim or a victim of ransomware attack, not only could you be impacted, have to pay the cost of the ransom if you decide to do it, you could also be in breach of government sanctions and face fines and penalties on top of that. So that's going to make people think very much twice about it. I did go a little bit of Yahoo when Steve said their CDR report showed that 49% got their data back, which I was going, cool, that means half people didn't. So, 50-50, you're going to get your data back if you pay. But unfortunately, this year's data is showing that 72% were
yeah, 72% got their of the ransom payers.
Of the ransom payers.
Of the ransom payers, 72%.
Now, putting our optimistic hat on, that means that 1/3. So you don't get their data back. So you have a 1 in 3 chance of getting your data back if you pay the ransom. Now, to me, I'm not a betting man. That's not a good, if you're paying a ransom of $100,000, that's not a good investment strategy.
It depends. It absolutely depends. Now, my number one hobby is poker. And I play in the World Series of Poker and the World Poker Tour. And as poker players, we're trained to calculate pot odds, meaning that what are the odds of making your hand versus the money you have to put in the pot. Well, the reason I bring that up is let's say your chances are 1 in 3 of getting your data back, and the ransom's $100,000, but your cost of downtime during that period is going to cause you to lose $1 million of downtime or $2 million of downtime. Is it worth that 1 in 3 shot to pay $100,000? As a poker player, I'd say, yeah, every day and twice the week on Sunday. So it all depends on your cost, and then of course downtime is just one cost, as you very well know.
Yeah. And then the final point, Michael, on the optimistic side of things and where things are going, we have seen successful takedowns in the past few months, and more of them are happening. Microsoft successfully took down the TrickBot infrastructure. Europol, through a fantastic operation with many police forces, and there's a fantastic video up on YouTube of the Ukrainian police taken down the data centers of the gang behind the Emotet ransomware family. So the police are getting very much more effective at this and better cooperation. So there are positive sides. There are things we can do to minimize the risk we have of getting impacted and indeed to be able to recover. So, the glass is just not, the glass is neither half full or half empty. We just don't have to have the right size glass.
Yeah, no, some great points made there, Brian and Steve. So thanks so much for those. And Sean, let's come to you. Like Brian mentioned there, ransomware gangs. We hear a lot about ransomware gangs. Obviously, your presentation there was very much focused on the growth of ransomware as a service and that kind of service model. Just how much more, threatening and how much more of an impact can these attacks have if they are, done through this service model now, where they're almost like mini businesses in themselves, aren't they? How much more of an impact and damage can they cause?
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways to answer that. I mean, there's no doubt that there's nation state actors as well as national groups behind some of this. There's little doubt about both of those happening. In some cases, these are going to be, it becomes very evident if you go to any of the underground forums and you have a look at these. They're simply not selling to some countries unless you can prove that you're fluent in language X or language Y, as well as all the IP routing and things like that. So, I mean, it's dangerous from its destructive perspective. It's also dangerous into where this money's going. I mean, you pay the ransom or not, or your files get exfiltrated. It's not like these are just going to somebody sitting at home in their mother's basement that normally games. These are going to some major criminal organization or probably a nation state that doesn't have your best interests in mind.
No, great point. And coming on to organizations now and looking at, strategies and advice for best practices with regards to defending against ransomware for organizations. Steve, what's your go-to top piece of advice for organizations?
So I actually prepared for this webinar, and I thought you might ask. I didn't know for sure if you might ask, but I wrote down a few things. I wrote down a list of 8, and I can blow through all 8 in less than 60 seconds. The first is we need to invest more in our human firewall. Each year in our cyber threat defense report, we ask, and I'm going to paraphrase the question, what's standing in the way of being a successful security professional? And is it budget? Is it lack of management oversight? The top 2 answer every year, and the sneak peek for April 21st, top answer for this year is low security awareness among employees. We're not doing enough to invest in our human firewall, in doing security awareness training or simulated phishing attacks. And so that's my number 1 answer is invest in the human firewall. We also need to hope for the best, okay, but plan for the worst. We need to assume a ransomware attack is going to happen, and we need to plan it out and know exactly. I'm interested in the results of your poll question, by the way. We need to plan out exactly what we're going to do and make a decision tree. Okay, if the ransom is this, or if it's this system, or whatever it is, what are the different parts of the decision tree to help us determine whether we're going to pay the ransom? Patching is important, and earlier we talked about backing up data. That is so critically important. Investing in technology that leverages machine learning and artificial intelligence. 85% of our CDR respondents prefer to buy security products that feature machine learning and artificial intelligence. Really, really important. Cyber insurance plays a role. And then lastly, cyber threat hunting. There's so many different network security, endpoint security solutions out there for cyber threat hunting, and IT service vendors that can help contribute. So, I agree with the point is there is so much more that we can do. We don't have to make it so easy for the ransomware attackers to, commit successful attacks. We need to do better, and we can.
Yeah, you mentioned there actually, Steve, that the ransomware plan element, and I think what we'll do is we'll have a look at the result of that poll question. So we asked, does your organization have a working ransomware recovery plan? So top answer 44% was yes, and it is proven to be effective. That was followed by 40% who went for yes, but its effectiveness is unproven. So 2 clear top answers there, really. And then we had 8% a piece for no and for unsure. So Brian, let's come to you. So we've got 44% saying yes, and it's proven to be effective. 40% saying yes, but its effective is unproven. So we've got 80+% there that do have a plan in place. So that's obviously a good thing. I guess kind of split down the middle, there's that angle where is unproven, so I guess untested, I assume, and I guess it highlights the importance of having a plan, but also regularly testing it and adapting it.
Correct, yeah, and I'd be even more interested if those who answered, David, their plan has been proven. Was that in actual case where they got hit by ransomware, or they ran simulations and were able to do it? And I think that's a key thing. Is it's one thing having a plan and writing down a plan, fantastic, but you do need to test it. So those who have plans in place, I'd do regular scenarios. It can be a desktop exercise. Do a what if scenario. What if this server got ransomed? What could happen? Look at the MITRE attack framework and work out ways that you could simulate how an attacker would happen. And very commonly, most ransomware attacks happen either by email. So coming back to Steve's talk there about security culture and awareness, is ensuring that people are aware not to click on dodgy links or attachments, which for us as security professionals sounds very good and makes sense. But when most people believe their job is opening links and attachments, it can be difficult for the end user to do it. So back that up then by obviously having good technical defenses to minimize the amount of chance the attackers can come in. But that could be simulation you could use. Or we helped a client recover from an attack just last week, where 15 of their 16 servers were encrypted in a ransomware attack, and that happened as a result of they opened up their RDP connections for during the pandemic to allow people working from home to get to the servers, but then it didn't secure RDP, put an MFA or restrict access to different areas. So if you've got remote access, be that RDP, Citrix gateways, VPNs, lock them down so users can't get in. But again, use that as your scenario to figure out for your plan. And don't just think about the technical aspects of your plan. Think about the personnel aspects. Do you rely on one or two people in your IT department to help recover from a ransomware attack? Well, simulate your attack happening when those people are unavailable, or simulate your attack happening at 2 o'clock in the morning, or just before the CEO is about to announce a major announcement that's going to impact your share price. So run plenty of simulations. And also, I think, again, I'm going to sound a pain throughout this webinar, but backups, but test your backups. Test, can you restore from your backups? And finally, sorry, I'm realizing I'm kind of hogging this, so my apologies, Michael. But again, to reiterate what Steve said, if you have a plan, that's great, but also have a policy. And we found when we've gone into our clients and said, have you got a ransomware plan and how are you going to respond to it? And they say, no. We go, okay, are you going to pay a ransom? And who's going to authorize that payment? So when you ask those questions, that actually drives it up into senior management, up to the board, for them to sort of say, okay, look, if we're going to make a payment of $1 million, who has the authority to do that? And how will we do it? And so you can actually use this, developing your plan as a way to get security more upfront and in front of the board and senior management. So
and it's so important to have that plan, because once the ransomware attack happens, there's a countdown clock. Okay.
Oh yeah.
and it's going to get more expensive, or you're going to have data leaked or really bad things as that deadline approaches. There are companies out there where their boards approve, or C-level people approve, $50,000, $100,000, $250,000 of Bitcoin that is just sitting in a Bitcoin account, ready to go just in case it happens, so that they're not fumbling around if they decide that they make the decision to pay. So I cannot emphasize how important it is to have a plan, and to Brian's point, have simulations of that plan, dry runs, so to speak. It's really important.
Yeah, no, great points. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of using the chaos monkey principle here, where the plan just goes off at a time when nobody at all knows about it. You can select inopportune times for sure, but it's start to finish, where it simulates the encryption or just offlines key components at random. And are you still in business? Can you still function? Like was mentioned earlier by Brian, can you get a hold of your one IT person that knows how to fix this? Can you get a hold of your board? What do you do from here? Is it going to work, and is it going to work quickly?
Yeah, great point. And I was going to come to you actually, Sean, for a few thoughts. Just based on something that Brian said there regarding the example with the RDP ports that has obviously opened up with the the shift to remote working over the last year. I mean, do you think that the evolutions and changes that we've seen in ransomware, particularly as a service and these kind of models over the last year, have been partly as a result of the pandemic and the shift to remote working and the changes that it's brought about, networking and how companies operate?
Brian had a great point there. It definitely made things more complicated from a automated detection perspective. I mean, most of the detection engines were written from the day when everybody would be sitting in a corporate office, and you could just throw up a local firewall on each of the endpoints that prevent half of this stuff. But at home is a big problem. And then, like Brian mentioned, everybody has to enable all of these hastily produced access mechanisms into what used to be physical access only. So, I mean, some of those will be locked down somewhat, but a year later, whatever controls they had in place are probably waning at this point. So it becomes not an extra avenue in, but once the attacker's in, it's another avenue to propagate really wide, really quickly. Yeah,
I guess there's also the piece here, Sean, with regards to the COVID itself, as kind of attackers tailoring and exploiting the pandemic and the various elements of it and the impact on society as well, and honing in on that and using it in their attack strategies.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of people that are clicking on simple spam emails where they would not have done that in the past. I mean, in the past, they were diligently aware that IT security was going to be sending all these tests to them regularly, and they would look at the different emails, scrutinize them deeply. But many of our clients talk to that everyone just clicks on those emails now, whether they're half in mind at work and half at home, or it's just because they're at home a little bit more comfortable, or what exactly it is. I don't know what the psychology aspect of it is there, but these days, everybody just clicks on emails. I mean, it's also exasperated by the fact that there's so many cloud providers that will send legitimate links that you'll use in your rush to be able to work from home, that people can't scrutinize. It's very difficult to tell if that's an attack or not. It's just a Microsoft Azure link. Who knows if that's hostile or not at the other end?
Yeah, great points. So it brings us on to a section I want to look at now, which is, what to do if you are hit by a ransomware attack and it's significant and it's causing an issue. Now, we've had a few comments about, paying ransoms, and it's always something that kind of causes a bit of, disagreement, let's say, in terms of the right and wrong thing to do. But Steve, let's come to you first. I mean, let's say an organization is hit by ransomware and it's, it's a fairly sizable, significant attack that's causing, an issue. What's your piece of advice to them? And then secondly, what's your thoughts on paying ransoms?
So, well, one thing and we haven't talked about this, there are companies out there, and I don't have any relationships with any of them, although I would like to. I'd like to talk to them and understand more about their businesses. But there's companies out there where they are ransomware specialists, where they can help you prevent ransomware attacks, also establish your ransomware plans. But here's also what's interesting. What's the movie with Russell Crowe, Proof of Life? And Russell Crowe is a K&R consultant, kidnap and ransom, and he's negotiating the ransom for the American hostage that was taken in Colombia. Glad I didn't see that movie before I went to Colombia, but anyway. So there are companies that will actually negotiate ransoms. Coveware is one of them, and they have this really cool quarterly ransomware report on their website. And they're not a customer of ours. I don't have any business relationship. I just think that their data is pretty interesting. They're an example of a company that can actually negotiate ransoms, and they say they typically decrease the ransom that's paid by about 50%. But I just want to throw this out there with regard to trends. Not only are we seeing more every year record ransomware attacks, record payments, but we're also seeing record average payments. According to Coveware, in Q1 2019, the average ransom payment was about $13,000 US. In Q4 of 2020, that has grown to $154,000 US. And that's like a 13% increase in less than 2 years. It's massive. So let me now, and I'm sorry, I wanted to get that out there before I answer your question. What are the considerations? To pay or not to pay? I'm a research guy. I'm an analytical guy. I want to, weigh the pros and cons and preferably map this out ahead of time. So it's sort of, maybe you have a decision support system where you just put in the inputs and then boom, it tells you what you should do. But the downsides, of course, the cost of the ransom, your odds of getting your data back after you pay the ransom, potential bad publicity, and you're funding cybercrime. By paying the ransom versus the uptime, you're reducing your downtime. You're more likely than not, I would say close to 3/4 likely going to get your data back. You're avoiding all this bad publicity, and if there's any extortion component to it, your data is not getting leaked. So I guess at the end of the day, it is not, in my view, a black or white decision. There are those out there that say no. Under no circumstances of any kind are we going to pay ransoms. Okay, well, that's easy to say when you're not affected by ransomware. But if you're a hospital, and last year we almost saw our first death by cyber attack, but if you're a hospital and lives are at stake here, it can be a different decision. It's a gray, in my view, it's very much a gray issue of whether you should pay or not to pay.
I hear what you're saying there, Steve, but for me, it's always deeply uncomfortable to pay a ransom to these people. I mean, they're going to be backdooring the snot out of your network along the way. And your disaster recovery plan is probably focused on just making sure you get yourself back into business. But I get all the arguments of sitting on the other side of the fence and all the deep implications of not paying the ransom and not getting into business quickly. But I do think that people pay a ransom will be shown to be hit a second time because they know that that's where the money is over and over and over again. I mean, it's the mobster thing from the 30s, right? Why do you rob the banks? That's where the money is. They're going to go back to people that pay.
If you're not going to fix the, what broke, then to your point, don't pay the ransom because you're just going to be hit again if you're not going to learn from it. So yeah, I hear you.
Yeah,
sorry, Michael. What we're seeing ransomware gangs do now, and I'm siding with Sean. Like I work with a lot of clients, and I understand the business issues, and we've dealt with ransomware attacks, and the business drivers there just get it fixed and get it up and running. To me, that actually is a symptom of how poorly security has been engaged with many businesses. It's seen as an IT problem. Fix it and make it go away. This is a business problem. And coming back to the point we made earlier on, if you can go to your board now with a ransomware plan and decide on the policy, that brings this question up to the fore. And it can drive a lot of good behaviors out of that, because even if the decision is, yes, we will pay a ransom up to $500,000 US, well, you can now go to the board. Well, if you don't want to spend $500,000 US, give us $100,000 so we can fix a lot of the problems. So that can help you that way. But ransomware gangs have changed tack now, where not only do they ask you for the ransom to get your data back, once you pay that, they are also now ransoming you to say, we actually have a copy of this data. If you don't want us to publish it onto the internet, pay us more money. So it comes back to Sean's point that these are criminals. They will extort you over and over and over again. And extortion then can take the next phase where you've got fake news coming out, for want of a better, fake ransoms, fake demands. And because you've paid it already, it's going to reimburse. And then my final point on this, and this is probably much more EU focused than internationally, but if you have personal data belonging to EU citizens, you are obliged by the EU General Data Protection Regulation to report a data breach. A ransomware attack where personal data of customers has been ransomed and encrypted is a data breach and needs to be reported. So if you don't report it to the regulator, you could end up potentially being fined on that. But and to me, coming forward and not paying the ransom, it negates that motivation for the criminals. They're getting more effective because they've got better budgets than many IT and cybersecurity teams. They've got better budgets. Criminal gangs have better budgets than many cybersecurity companies. The more they get paid, the better they're going to get, and we're just going to be a vicious circle.
Yeah, great point. I'm just going to kick off the third and final poll question quickly for the last 10 minutes or so. So that will be on your screen now. So we want to know, quite straightforward, has your organization suffered a ransomware attack in the last 12 months? Options are A, yes, and it had a large impact. B, yes, but the impact was not significant. C, no, or D, unsure. So that one is live now. So again, please do vote on that, and thank you to everyone that's voted on the previous two as well. We'll have a look at the other one still outstanding in just a moment. I'm just going to drop the slides down, just staying on that topic of paying ransom. Just because we've had a question come in, it was an interesting one from one of our viewers. So keen to have a look at it. And one of our viewers wants to know, if you pay and get your data back, do you not need to sanitize your systems afterwards to ensure the criminals are out of your infrastructure? This will obviously cause more downtime and impose further costs on the business. You're kind of nodding your head there. Sean, would you agree with that? I mean,
yeah, it's a really big problem. There's been a real big problem here since the dawn of ransomware, if not before. But nowadays, the attacks are such long cycle. They're taking weeks, and they're spending a lot of time looking for your crown jewels, reconnoitering the entirety of your business activities as well as the physical assets. They know all the nooks and crannies, where to hide a backdoor. They know about that machine that's used all the time by accounting that it supposedly doesn't exist, but the entire team uses it, and it hasn't been patched since far too long. They know about all the little IPs that they have to come from to be able to get into the different RDP sessions and things like that. Like Brian mentioned earlier, They also know that they could just get into those individual machines in the home network so that they can come back in at will. Yeah, of course. I mean, the cleanse cycle is probably going to be much more destructive than recovering from the ransomware itself, assuming that you have some avenue of backup for something.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm keen to have a look at the result of the other poll question as well. So I'm just going to bring that up now. So we asked, how confident are you in your organization's ability to successfully prevent, detect, and mitigate ransomware? There was a clear top answer here. So 61% said reasonably confident. That was followed by 16% who said very unconfident. We had 6% apiece for very confident and reasonably unconfident, with 9% unsure. So top there, 61% reasonably confident. What do you think, Steve? Do you think is that what you're seeing in your research and reports that across organizations have at least a reasonable level of confidence when it comes to ransomware?
Yeah, I mean, the good news here, if there is a silver lining to this, in our industry, it's that technology is getting better every year. And I think one of the most significant paradigm shifts over the past decade has been machine learning and artificial intelligence, leveraging technology to do more with fewer resources. Back to the CDR, I mentioned the number one inhibitor preventing security professionals from defending their networks is low security awareness among employees. Number two is a shortage of qualified IT security personnel, and that affects just about all organizations that we're struggling to recruit and retain qualified security talent. So the good news here is, machine learning and artificial intelligence have made great strides in threat detection. I'm so glad as an industry we're taking cyber threat hunting more seriously. And it's also, even from SOAR technology, allowing us to automate key functions. So that's the good news, is we are finding ways to increase the efficacy of our threat detection systems while also finding ways to accomplish more with fewer resources. So I think there's a little bit more optimism each year as we invest and make new investments. But I think most security professionals are of the mindset these days that it's not really a matter of if we're going to be compromised. It's more of a question of when, and that's, I think, the right attitude to have.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Brian, we just touch on that with you. I mean, from what you're seeing working with organizations now, compared to 2 or 3 years ago, do you think organizations in general are getting better at dealing with understanding ransomware and dealing with it kind of across the board? Or is it dependent on type of organization and even sector, I guess?
I think it's backing up Steve's point there that organizations across the board, across industries and across geographies are taking cybersecurity more seriously now. Some more seriously than others, depending on where they are. But the key thing is, and backing up what Sean said there and Steve, is one of the key things that companies are looking at now is actively monitoring their environment for suspicious activity. 2 years ago, monitoring and threat hunting were a very much a unique thing that not many organizations were doing. That is changing now, and we're seeing companies now looking more seriously towards how do we better monitor our environment? How do we ensure that we detect attacks early enough that we can respond to them and that we can identify suspicious activity? So it's I think that's the positive. I would say to those who are confident or somewhat confident about their defenses, please do a simulation and test just to see how confident you are. And maybe backing up what Sean said earlier on, do have a look at that Chaos Monkey tool to see can you simulate an attack, because everybody's confident before they get on a football pitch and then realize the other team is much better.
Yeah, good point. Sean, I've got a question coming from one of our viewers that I'll throw over to you, and it's kind of a slightly shifting the topic ever so slightly, but I guess it's linked, and they're asking how can a zero trust model prevent ransomware, or how effective can zero trust be in preventing ransomware? I guess particularly at the moment where we've got a lot of remote workers and various endpoints and things off the traditional network. Can zero trust kind of be a good aid in that regard?
Yeah, so I mean that actually ties into something that that Brian mentioned with the need to be able to have really strong threat hunting organizations as well. I mean that's one of the reasons why I joined Axzero, to make sure that we have really strong, robust threat hunting everywhere. So zero trust, if you implement it very rigidly everywhere, yeah, absolutely, it can reduce a whole bunch of your attack surface to any threat really, but ransomware as well. But ransomware is they understand how to get through most of the detection mechanisms that exist now. I mean, I spent like 2 decades using ML to create different detection engines and endpoint security mostly. The ransomware authors understand what's there. They understand how to get around it. They largely moved to living off the land attacks and things like that, where they're using local processes almost entirely. So, I mean, in principle, the theory of zero access, absolutely, it can help in big ways. I haven't seen it work really solidly end to end. And I can see it causing some problems with, let's call it ad hoc threat hunting. I mean, if you aren't really well versed into what's going on in a customer's network, the environment that your threat hunters are working in, it's going to be difficult to understand the segmentation that's happening there.
Great, thanks, Sean. I'm going to close off the final poll question now and have a look at those results before we look to wrap up. Got just a few minutes left. So we asked, has your organization suffered a ransomware attack in the last 12 months? 68% was the top answer, and that was no. 15% unsure, 12% yes, but the impact was not significant. Only 3% saying yes, and it had significant impact. I'm not going to go to the comments for that one. I think they kind of speak for themselves, and I think it's, you know,
I'm worried about the
interesting
50% that don't know they had an attack.
Well, yes, good point, Brian. But I mean, just generally looking to kind of wrap things up here. I mean, what's everyone's sort of key, takeaway or key prediction for what we're going to see from ransomware this year and into next? Steve, should we start with you?
Sure, I have an ominous prediction, and I'm gonna say sometime in the next 2 years for this one. Last September, we almost had our first death by cyber attack. So what happened, for those of you who aren't aware, is the Dusseldorf University Hospital in Germany was victimized by ransomware, and so the hospital's systems could not accept new patients. There was a woman that was involved in a very bad car accident, and the Dusseldorf University Hospital would have been the closest hospital. So she was transferred by ambulance to a hospital much further away, and at some point she was pronounced dead. So for a while, a lot of the media publications were claiming that this was the first death by cyber attack. In November, the government authorities declared that the ransomware attack was not a contributing factor. Okay, so we're still looking for our first death by cyber attack. I think it's a matter of time. We're seeing hospitals, local governments a lot, but also hospitals. And MITRE, I just saw MITRE just yesterday or this week launched the Ransomware Resource Center, healthcyber.mitre.org, specifically for hospitals and health systems to help respond to ransomware attacks. But my prediction is, unfortunately, I don't know if it's 2021, but I think by the end of next year, we may see our first death by cyber attack, and I think it could be ransomware.
Okay, great. Brian, anything you want to add there? Maybe, how about slightly maybe on the optimistic side?
Yeah, I thought Steve was he said he was an optimist. I don't believe him now. I think, look, ransomware is not going to go away anytime soon. And the threat's going to get worse before it gets better, because criminals are making too much money out of this to simply turn away. And we're going to see wormable ransomware happening. We've already seen it, but it's going to become more widespread. On the plus side, this is now getting the attention of governments, and we are seeing serious moves be made by policymakers and governments that sort of say this can't go on, and looking at ways to tackle ransomware gangs outside of the technology sphere. So yes, we can take down their infrastructures, and we'll continue doing that and operating that way, and that's one way for us to do it. But we are going to see significant moves, hopefully, over the next 12 to 24 months of governments taking this threat a lot more seriously than it currently is, and through sanctions and everything else, we will see those behind. Ransomware attacks are only going to stop when the criminals are in jail, and that's where we're going to see.
Yeah, good point, Brian. And Sean, any last thoughts from you and predictions for what's to come?
Yeah, I mean, I remember back to the early 2000s when we had all these flash worms like Code Red, Nimbus, SQL Slammer. They're propagating around the whole world very rapidly. I mean, thankfully, a lot of them were mostly benign. But here we have a whole bunch of very active criminal organizations with a very large key at this point. They have a lot of money sitting there, a lot of technical resources, a lot of research time. For sure, they're going to find more 0 days. For sure, they're going to propagate quickly. And they've already built right into their infrastructure the ability to propagate locally, find all the crown jewels right away. So we're going to see massive data leaks. Some will be followed by or precursed by a ransom, but it will be the same attack, the same actor groups. And the use of that data will be distributed through their mechanisms that they have from their RaaS services.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sean. Well, looking at the time, we've come up to the hour there, so we're going to have to look to wrap things up. But a huge thank you to Sean, Brian, and Steve for being here with us today. Really enjoyed speaking with you all, and a great presentation, Sean, so I very much enjoyed that. So yeah, thank you to all three of you for your time. A big thank you to Act Zero as well for their sponsorship of this session. And of course, a huge thank you to our viewers. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. Remember that you can watch it back on demand on our website shortly. So if you were slightly late or if you just want to take it in again, you can do. With regards to what's coming from us in the near future, our next webinar is taking place next Thursday, and we're looking at staying secure during rapid transformation, the importance of DevSecOps. So another important topic and an interesting one to be exploring. So we hope you can join us for that one if you can. But without further ado, I'll say thank you all once again, and we will end the session there.
Great, thanks.